Hey everyone, welcome. Today in this explainer, we're doing something really fun. We're putting ghosts, curses, and all those creepy bumps in the night right under the microscope. We're going to strip away the superstition from some of history's absolute most terrifying legends. And what we're going to find is a fascinating truth. A lot of what we call the supernatural is actually just science waiting to be understood. So to kick things off, let's travel back in time to a place people were literally terrified to even look at. It's called the Turkish Plutonian at Hierapolis. Now, picture this. You're standing near the entrance of this dark, brooding stone cave. A bird flies a little too close and just drops right out of the sky, completely dead. You lead a donkey toward the opening, it collapses on the spot. No life left in it whatsoever. There are no arrows, no poison darts, no visible wounds at all. Just instant, mysterious death. Spooky, right? You can totally see why the people living back then gave this site a pretty chilling nickname, a literal gate to hell. I mean, put yourself in their shoes for a second. If you lived centuries ago, way before modern chemistry or biology were even a thing, and you witnessed this incredibly visceral, terrifying scene where living creatures just drop dead the second they cross some invisible line, what else could you possibly conclude? To them, there was no other explanation. It had to be the work of underworld gods, demonic magic, and a deeply rooted curse. To everyone around, this cave was a physical doorway to the underworld, just snatching the souls of anything that dared to get close. Now, it's super easy for us, sitting here comfortably with our smartphones and modern science, to look back at the ancients and think, well, they were just naive or, overly superstitious. We tell ourselves there's no way we jump to those kinds of supernatural conclusions today. But actually, scratch that. This phenomenon of myth-making, of creating these terrifying narratives out of things we just can't explain, it isn't just ancient history. It's a fundamental part of human nature. When our brains encounter something completely frightening or inexplicable, they are hardwired to fill in the blanks. And to prove that this still happens today, well, we only need to look at our very own modern urban legends. Which brings us to a much more recent and frankly terrifying ghost story that made the rounds. It's the legend of the Green Man. According to local whispers and, classic campfire tales, if you went out driving on certain dark, isolated roads late at night, you might just run into this horrific, ghostly figure haunting the woods. Rumor had it he had absolutely no face, and even worse, his skin gave off this eerie, supernatural green glow. Honestly, you probably had a super similar spooky story in your own hometown, right? It's that classic quintessential ghost story designed to keep teenagers from wandering around in the dark. But okay, let's bring it back to reality for a second, because this is where the story shifts. The Green Man wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a demon or some supernatural entity creeping in the woods. He was a real flesh and blood guy named Raymond Robinson. And the true story behind his appearance? It is just an absolute tragedy. Raymond suffered a horrific accident involving a massive 22,000-volt electrical shock. 22,000 volts! He miraculously survived it, but that kind of voltage left him with catastrophic facial injuries and severe disfigurement. And because he didn't want to cause a panic or have people staring at him during the day, he simply chose to take his walks at night. That supernatural glow people swore they saw, it was literally just a misinterpretation of his tragic healing skin grafts and electrical burns reflecting under the faint streetlights. So really think about what that means. On one hand, we have this ancient cave that seemingly murders animals with invisible magic. And on the other, a modern man who got transformed into a glowing phantom purely by neighborhood rumors. What connects these ancient curses to our modern ghost stories? How does a grieving guy taking a midnight walk suddenly become the local monster, exactly the same way a geological cave becomes a portal to hell? I want you to connect the dots here with me, because recognizing this pattern, it sets up a massive paradigm shift in how we understand history and honestly, how we process our own fears. Okay, let's dive into this because this is the absolute intellectual core of our explainer today. We really need to completely reframe how we look at mythology. We shouldn't be viewing myths as just silly fairy tales or foolish superstitions. Instead, think of them as early data interpretation. The ancient people at Hierapolis and the locals spotting Raymond Robinson, they were observing real, hard data. Animals were actually dying. A figure really was walking around in the pitch black. Their observation of the data was 100% accurate. It was the interpretation of that data that went sideways, simply because they lacked the scientific framework to understand what they were looking at. Mythology is literally just humanity trying to make sense of unrecognized scientific phenomena. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what was happening back at the Turkish Plutonian. It's a stark contrast. The myth tells us it's a gate to hell powered by demonic magic. But the actual science? It reveals a completely invisible lake of poisonous carbon dioxide gas. See, the cave at Hierapolis sat directly over a fault line that was constantly venting massive amounts of carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide is heavier than the oxygen we breathe, which means it naturally sinks and pools right at ground level. So when birds flew low or when short animals trotted near the entrance, they were basically being dunked into an invisible lake of deadly CO2 gas, suffocating almost instantly. No underworld magic at all, just straightforward chemistry and atmospheric pressure. But wait, hold on a second. This brings up an incredibly fascinating mystery. If this invisible lake of carbon dioxide gas was so unbelievably deadly to any animal that got near the cave, how in the world did the ancient priests survive? Because historical records clearly show that the priests of Hierapolis would just casually stroll right into the Plutonian, totally unharmed, to show off their divine power to the terrified crowds. If the science says the gas is lethal, how did these human priests willingly walk into a literal death trap and live to tell the tale? I mean, it's no wonder everyone was convinced they held godlike magical powers.
So the crucial point to understand here is that these priests were actually performing a masterful ancient magic trick, backed entirely by physics. It basically came down to two really clever steps. Step 1, they figured out how to locate thin, safe pockets of breathable oxygen. And step 2, they made absolutely sure to keep their heads elevated high above that heavier, sinking carbon dioxide. Remember how the CO2 pools super low to the ground? The animals, being shorter, breathed it straight in. But the priests, standing tall and upright, kept their faces in the fresh air floating just above the toxic layer. If they had to bend down, they probably just held their breath. They had simply figured out the environmental mechanics of the cave and used that hidden science to manufacture a miracle.
It's amazing how this completely reshapes our understanding of these haunting tales, isn't it? When we actually unmask the supernatural, all that terror just falls apart under the lens of science in the most fascinating way. Curses are just early, flawed data interpretations by humans doing their best to understand a wild world. The terrifying gate to hell? Just geological carbon dioxide gas. The invincible magical priests? Just clever observers using oxygen pockets and their height to pull off an illusion. And that glowing ghost of the Green Man was just a heartbreaking 22,000-volt accident. We take our primal fear of the unknown, and through the power of science, we beautifully transform it into these grounded, fascinating facts.
The journey we've taken today really raises a pretty profound question about our future. We've solved the mysteries of the Plutonian and the Green Man, but honestly, human nature hasn't changed one bit. We are still constantly observing phenomena we don't quite understand. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. When you scroll through the news today or you hear some bizarre, unexplainable story, what supernatural or seemingly impossible event happening right now is really just waiting for tomorrow's scientific explanation? Keep questioning what you see, keep looking for the real data, and never, ever stop exploring the science hiding behind the magic.